Hello everyone and good morning. Welcome back to English Poetry at the Islamic University of Gaza. We continue to speak about John Donne. Last time we had a short and brief class on John Donne's poem, parody poem, The Bait. Today we continue to speak about this very, very significant literary poetic movement in history, spearheaded and led by John Donne. Now, before I give you some information about John Donne himself or his movement and how he wrote poetry, how different his poetry was, I want to say something about the neoclassical movement of that time. When we speak about classical literature, we speak about ancient Greece, ancient Rome. We speak about the giants, like Homer, for example, with the Odyssey and the Iliad. The text that many people consider to be the greatest of all times because of so many things. Now, later on in time, about 2,000 years ago, there was some kind of decline in poetry. Poetry was not as great as it should be, as it was before. And many critics, one of them is named Horace, who was a teacher, a critic, and also a poet, wanted to push his people, his society, to educate his society, the poets of his time, and teach them how to write great poetry. The answer was simple. If you want to write great poetry, you need to imitate great poets. If you want to write great poetry, all you have to do is just copycat the great poets. And for this, he examined, like many great texts, tragedies and epics, long poems. And he came with three things under the rules of decorum. I just want to summarize them in these three important points. We call them the rules of decorum. And decorum is from decor, yeah? Internal decor, external decor. From decorate, to make something more beautiful, more appropriate, to make things more attractive, perhaps, more appealing. Now, number one, he said, if you need to write poetry, you need to choose your topic, your subject carefully. The subject matter. What you write about has to be of great significance. You need to write about great truths, about things that touch the society as a whole, about important themes. And then, if you want to write about important themes, necessarily you need to use what we might describe as the poetic diction. Dictionary means language. You need to use a sublime language, highly embellished language, a language that can convey the greatness and the significance of this subject matter. And then the forms you need to adopt in order to differentiate poetry from other kinds of writings. Right. You need to write adopting certain forms that have, rules also with certain structures, the number of lines, the number of syllables, the number of feet, the way the lines should rhyme or shouldn't. Now, many other things, but basically these are the three things I am interested in. So, subject matter, like what, for example? Like you write poetry about great battles, about epics, about heroes, about kings, about queens, about the gods, about myths, about king and the queen. Things that, again, touch the society as a whole, of great significance to the whole society. You don't write about trivial things, insignificant things. These things should not be in poetry. Because, again, poetry is meant, basically, and this, again, you studied this with Aristotle and other critics, how literature is meant to teach and delight. What are you going to teach me if you're writing a poem about, I don't know, your lucky pen, or your lucky pencil, or your most favorite piece of pizza, your cat mewing and waking you up in the middle of the night? This is not of great significance to many people. So this is not, a topic fit enough for poetry, worthy enough of poetry. You write about it, I don't know, you use comedy, you use prose, you just tell people the story of this insignificant topic you want to talk about, right? But don't use poetry, because poetry is great, is meant for great things, for significant things. So subject matters have to be elite, sublime. And again, the language, this means that not every word, every expression can make it to language. Conversational language, colloquial language, slang, not poetry. Cannot be poetic. You need to choose your words and to word your words carefully, in a way that is different from ordinary speech, from conversational speech, in a way that you, again, you touch people. You show people that you're not an ordinary person. You're not writing ordinary stuff. If this is a very significant topic, I'm using a very significant, a highly embellished, a refined language. I like to use the word refined to describe how ridiculous this is sometimes. A refined language. You know, when they do petrol and the gas and stuff, there is a refinery, refineries in Iraq and Saudi Arabia to refine things. Because you need to make things decorous, beautiful, attractive, to achieve the sublime. So not every word, not every phrase, not every kind of language can make it to poetry or should make it to poetry, because there is something that is unpoetic in language. And again, that there's greatness here, greatness in the theme, in the topic, in the subject matter, greatness in the medium, in the means, in the language itself. Now you have to put this in the most beautiful form there is. Most highly, again, I would say, highly structured, like we spoke, for example, I like to give the sonnet as an example of how you can achieve this. Everything is calculated. Everything counts. Remember? The number of lines, the number of syllables, the way you rhyme. Now, in England, in the 16th century, many people adopted this. And in the 17th century, probably the 17th century was we call this in England, if this is classicism, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, what happened in England is usually described as neoclassicism or neoclassicism. Classiquية الحديثة, جديدة, or whatever. Because people wanted to, again, in England, again, they asked the question, how can we write great poetry? And there was this inferiority complex in England. They always wanted to compete. They always wanted to be better. But ironically, instead of creating their own forms, again, they ended up imitating Italian, and not only Italian, but also ancient Roman and Greek forms of literature. 17th century, and even in the 18th century, this was the norm. Like, we talk about 300 years of people believing in the right way. There was the right way and the wrong way. Not only that, many people believe that this could exclude some poets. If you don't follow the rules, if you don't try to choose your subjects carefully, if you don't use the language that ought to be used, or you fit them in the form, you can be banished. You can be banished. You will not be considered a poet. Interesting. Now, in Arabic, we have the same thing, by the way. In Arabic, we have the same thing. Look at the old classical Arabic poetry. Almost 2,000 years of writing poetry in the very same way. Very strict rules. Change was almost impossible. And sadly, in our traditions, many people try to connect the poetry, the classical Arabic poetry, with the Quran and the Hadith. So if everybody tried to change something about the poetry, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to say something about the Quran and the Hadith, trying to change them in a way? This is sad. That's why many Arab poets, by the way, were banished just because they wanted to write different poetry. They wanted to change. And only recently, some of those poets, and we talk about Nazik al-Malaika, Badr Shakr al-Sayyab, we talk about like 70 years ago. And when khalas, poets said enough, with all due respect to classical Arabic poetry, we need to change. There are other forms out there. Language is now different. Life is now different. So why don't we adapt? Why don't we change? And even like for decades and decades, those poets by many conservative critics were not considered serious poets. Shar al-Hor, free verse, and this thing, and many people did not. Even at universities, only recently some universities started to take Badr Shakr al-Sayyab and Nazik al-Kafarna, and even poets like Ahmad Madar to take them seriously. And this is interesting. Now, the same thing happened in England, but a lot earlier. When people were writing, if I don't know how I could describe the timeline of Neoclassicism. If we talk about the 16th century, and then the 17th century, 16th century, late 16th century, early 17th century, where John Donne was writing, and then 17th century and 18th century, and then we go to the Romantic movement. If you want to write, I don't know, this stupid timeline. John Donne was here, basically. But I'm talking about this whole period here. So when John Donne came, if you look at, probably I noted this last time, John Donne is a contemporary of Shakespeare and probably a contemporary of Marlowe and Ben Jonson. But he's not classified as any of those people. He's not classified. We describe him as an Elizabethan, Jacobean, like many things, because he lived during many reigns. Okay. Now, I would say during the heyday of Neoclassicism, when English poets believed wholeheartedly in these rules of decorum, that if you wanted to write poetry, you need to follow these rules. Someone said, no, nuh-uh, not doing it. And this man is John Donne. He refused this, and we'll see today, probably also next class, we'll talk about what he did and how he did what he did. Now, most of what I'm going to say is my interpretations reading John Donne's poems. He did not write a book of criticism. He did not write an article of criticism suggesting to people what to do or condemning and criticizing the mainstream rules of versification. And I'll try to make my point, and it's up to you to believe whatever you want to believe. Now, John Donne, number one, believed that there's no such thing as the subject matter. It's wrong. Anything, anybody can make it to a poem. Why would poetry? Because, by the way, if we talk about poetry in this way, I believe it makes poetry an elite practice. An elitist practice, meaning poetry is only for the rich. Poetry is only for the king, for the queen, for the nobility, for the royal family, for people who go to Oxford, to Cambridge, for the educated, for people who learn Latin. It means poetry is not for the many, it's for the few, for the 1% rather than for the 99%. And I think Bernie Sanders would be proud of John Donne, you know. And this is not, because literature is meant to be for all. Now, drama, look at this, how this elitist idea of literature, if we make literature elitist, it destroys literature. If we make literature for just some group, that's not good. If you look at drama, you're studying drama, drama is for all. Look at Shakespeare and the Globe. The irony is that the rich people wanted to pay money to stay farther away from the stage, where the poor people paid just pennies, and they were like standing this close to the actors on the stage, sometimes pulling their clothes, you know, throwing stuff at them, insulting them, making fun of them, laughing at them, feeding them things to say, you know. And people, I'm sure people up above were like, what the hell are those people doing? They're spoiling the fun for us. We come here to enjoy, you know, Hamlet or Macbeth or whatever, and those people are just keep, you know, they crack jokes. And I would find this very interesting how it's like a kind of festival where everybody has to be there, where this is the only place where the poor people can send messages to the people above. And for this, the rich people said, okay, we need to find a way out. And they kind of created the masks, you know, the masks, the plays that were specifically written for the king or the palace, specifically performed for those people, performed once, and even the actors were mostly family members from the elite, from the family members and everything, because they wanted things to be only for them. Now, poetry for a lot of time was something like this. Well, of course, I never talk in generalities. You will find many other things, but it was, and sorry for, again, this another digression. Many people believe Shakespeare is not Shakespeare because of this elitist belief that you have to be an Oxford or Cambridge graduate in order to write what Shakespeare wrote. People who say Shakespeare is not Shakespeare, you know, there are many reasons, but one of these reasons is that some people believe it's impossible for someone who just went to a grammar school like Shakespeare to write these great masterpieces. So this idea is also itself elitist. That if you are a poor man, if you didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, you can't write something like this. It's impossible for you to write something like this. And this is interesting how to look at things, because sadly, and we'll see this in a bit, sadly and unfortunately, we usually take critics for granted. Ben Jonson said something, oh, he must be right. Aristotle said something, oh, he must be right. Dryden, one of the greatest critics and poets, he must be right. He's Dryden. Who am I to question Dryden? And this is wrong, because there will always be frames and constructs imposed upon us. We need to break them, to unframe this. Now, anything can be in a subject matter. Look at John Donne's poem, The Flea, you know, the disgusting little creature that keeps jumping and sucking blood. The bait, and look at the scenery, the setting, and everything. We'll see what he does to the sonnet, the most sacred form of all forms. And then anything can make it to. You will find in John Donne words, expressions that can't be found anywhere in any poem. The way he starts the poem, the way he elaborates on the conceits, the long, metaphors, the language he uses. And that's why, and this is again sad, we'll talk about this in a bit, some people describe John Donne as vulgar. Why are you talking to God like this? Ravish me, batter my heart. Why are you giving orders to God? That's vulgar of you, lugha suqiyya. But I don't think it's true. I don't think he's vulgar. He's using the language of the masses rather than the language of the elite. He's trying to avoid using an embellished language, sometimes a dead language. He's trying to appeal to the masses rather than to the elite. And this, for many people, is not good. Okay? We'll see and give examples. And then the forms, the rules, especially how many syllables you should have, how many, and the rhyme scheme and everything. Don't get this wrong. John Donne would follow these rules, basically. But if the rule hinders the meaning, the emotions, the feelings, he will break the rule. That's simple. And if most of the poems, I could show you 1,000 poems from the time of John Donne, before him and after him, during him. And then you'll find that they look like boxes, It's the same. We've seen with Shakespeare's sonnets. Thousands of lines, almost all of them 10 syllables, 5 feet. With John Donne, he could sometimes do a variety of things. 5 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet. Because he believes that the meaning, the thought, the idea, the experience is more significant than the rule. If the rule restricts and limits his the release of emotions, his expression, he would break the rule. So here, sadly, Again, no disrespect to classical poetry at all, don't get me wrong. When we talk about the rules of decorum, sometimes we talk about a given form, some kind like templates. If you want to write a sonnet, here you go. Shakespeare, here you go. You know, quatrain, 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 couplet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. Yalla, fill it in. Throw the words in there. Make your poem. But this is your lane. Don't go here, don't go there. For John Donne, the meaning always comes over the rule. Here, neoclassicism, rules of decorum, rules come first. Rules come first. Rules come first. And for John Donne, no. So in my understanding, I believe that the first serious attempt to bring poetry from the ivory tower, ivory tower, the highest, the peak, the castles, the king, the rich people, the elite, changing poetry from being an elitist practice, bringing it down to us, the poor people, the downtrodden, the oppressed, the ordinary people, the masses, the 99% was John Donne. So I think John Donne, I could safely say this personally, I believe in this, that John Donne brought poetry down to earth. John Donne brought it from the castles, from the palaces, from the courts, down to us, to you, to me, to the masses, by making it appeal to our experiences, to our languages and everything, the way we speak, the way we think. And this is a very, very serious thing to do. In my understanding, in my reading of John Donne, he is the first real modernist in English poetry. When you read books about poetry, literary books and criticism, when critics speak about romanticism, they say this is the first real modernist movement. It's true. But John Donne, 100 years, like more than 100 years before them, he was engaged in the same thing, writing against the current, breaking the rules of the mainstream rules of versification, rejecting the given forms of poetry, refusing the elite, highly embellished language of poetry, saying everybody can be a poet, everything can be in poetry, every language can be in poetry, every experience is worthy to be in poetic forms. Okay? Now, if you have questions, please. If you have anything, any suggestion, anything, please.
If Horace, as a teacher of poetry in Greek era, told...
He's a Roman poet and critic. Yeah.
So he gave rules to people to write about the subject, the poetic diction, and the form. So for you as a poet and a teacher at this time, and you write poetry, what is like the summarized or the small definition of poetry for the people who want to write what they don't know?
Now, okay, for those, in my way, it's good to understand all of this. And this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to understand how people do. And then when you write poetry, you just write poetry. I don't believe in given forms. Okay? Here, the definition of poetry is poetry. In Arabic, it's again similar. العرب بيقولوا إنه الشعر قول موزون ومقفى وله معنى. Something with strict music and strict rhyme scheme. Look at this. The music, the rhythm, and the rhyme come before the meaning. Rules, meaning. Okay? There is one objective here, or two objectives, to teach and delight, to educate and to please. So in my understanding, my way of doing things, my philosophy, poetry should not have, it's good to follow the rules, but if you can't, again, we are not native speakers, for example. If I ask you to write sonnets and nothing but sonnets, you will fail, and you will fail miserably. And again, this is one reason, in my understanding, that many people wanted us to follow the rules, so that we fail and fail miserably. I was reading this piece of information. I think I didn't go after it, but it's mind-blowing. Somebody was saying he used, what's that French word? Rendezvous, something like this. He wrote that on Twitter and said, Not one letter in this word is pronounced as it is written. And in the reply, someone was saying, this was deliberate in French because the elite did not want the masses to understand how to write, how to spell, and how to read. So we have this, always the class division and how the rich people wanted to be different, wanted to not only to be different, but also to tread on the lower classes. It happens, it's happening, it has been happening since the, you know. So if you have the feeling, the urge to release some kind of experience in a form you consider poetry, just write it down. This could be extreme, but for many people, they would object to me saying this. Please. Now, one more question?
Yeah, can we say that John Donne make like he was a revolutionary poet, or like attack the mainstream poets implicitly, or they know that he attacks them or what?
Okay. There is, again, a big debate here. Was John Donne just a mere digression? Was he just a digression? Was he just, you know, this idiom in English, a fluke, somebody who just wrote differently and that's it? I believe John Donne was conscious, was deliberately trying to subvert and undermine the mainstream critics and poets. And when we mention, and we're going to do this again, the "Come Live With Me and Be My Love" bit, there's clear intention. He's quoting somebody, he's dragging Marlowe and his courtly love, you know, the idealistic Elizabethan way of writing poetry, dragging him and saying, hey, nobody has all the pleasures. Mine are new. I could take this metaphorically to mean his new ways of writing poetry. The way, the sensibility, the new sensibility. So I think, yeah, John Donne implicitly and explicitly, he attacked those people, the neoclassicists. But again, for some people, it's not that explicit. And remember, he didn't write, one problem with John Donne and his school is that they didn't write like essays or books to tell the people like the Romantics did, to define poetry and to say, hey, poetry, enough. We should write poetry in this way. And the other problem is that John Donne was writing in the heyday of neoclassicism. The Romantics were writing here. When there was, you know, a decline, people have had enough of neoclassical poetry and they wanted to change. And even then, some of those Romantics were not famous during their lifetimes. Life is crazy. And we'll see, one critic, we'll see what critic said this. Ben Jonson said John Donne will perish. He will die out. He will be forgotten. Nobody will remember him for breaking the rules. And now we're talking about John Donne. He is one of the most significant English poets. And we don't talk, again, with all due respect to Ben Jonson, or not. We don't talk about him that much. Please.
I just want to say that what I truly love about John Donne is that he didn't only try to subvert, or let's say to challenge humans only, or his society. I think that he had enough of life as a whole. Like, for example, in his poem about death, he was challenging death itself. So I think that he was done with life as a whole, and this is why he was trying to challenge everything.
John Donne had a very tough life. We'll talk about this in a bit. His life was not that easy. But you could, and that's the beautiful thing about Donne. This is why I like Donne as much as I like Shakespeare. There are always layers for his poetry. Come Live With Me and Be My Love, the bit, it's a love poem with sensuality and the sexuality there in the poem. But it's also a religious poem. If you read it as a religious poem, it's also mind-blowing. So Death Be Not Proud, this is a religious poem, clearly. Can I take it as somebody, like you said, defying and challenging authority? Perhaps. Perhaps.
I know that, like, you didn't encourage us to read about the life of poets before, like, analyzing poems. But, like, an interesting thing that I found about John Donne, that he was like a Catholic when everyone was Anglican.
True.
So that made life even more difficult for him.
That's true.
He couldn't even graduate. Like, he studied in Cambridge and Oxford, but like he couldn't get a degree the
That's
end
true.
because he was atheist.
That's true.
So that also influenced.
Of course. There's a lot of his life in his poetry. But my way is that let's see what the text says and then go back to his life rather than the other way around. And that's why Ben Jonson himself, who was a contemporary of John Donne, said John Donne deserves hanging for breaking the rules, for breaking the accents of poetry. Deserves hanging. Like you could, if you come mid-story, somebody saying, yeah, he deserves hanging. Oh my God, what did he do? Who did he kill? Whose piece of pizza did he eat? You know, serious offenses. But he just broke the rules of decorum. He didn't, write like we write. He didn't compose poetry the way we are accustomed to composing. They're like, what? And then going back to this, like many people say, no, he meant it metaphorically. No, it was, in my opinion, my understanding, this is a serious threat against John Donne's life. John Donne had some family members killed for being Catholic. Can you imagine that? His cousin, his uncle, I think his uncle was killed because he was a Catholic. He was originally born a Catholic, and then later on he had, for practical or pragmatic reasons, he had to convert to the new Church of England. So when you come to somebody who was originally a Catholic, at a time when Catholics were persecuted and killed, not only for being Catholics, or people were killed because they were harboring and hiding Catholics in their homes. And then you tell, hey, you deserve hanging. No. This is a serious threat. Now why? Because people are extreme. When we love something, we want everybody to follow and respect it. And then we also, sometimes there are personal gains and personal interests. I'm not saying that these critics were doing stuff for money, but money could have played part in this because they were patrons. Patrons were people who would give you social and political protection and give you money to write them poetry. If there is a new poet in time doing poetry differently, writing different poetry, he might attract so many of these patrons which might influence them. But like mostly I believe that they believe that this is religion. This is the way poetry has to be written. Okay? So when John Donne did this, he was rejected altogether. No negotiation, nothing. His contemporaries, and later on we talk about Dryden, we talk about Samuel Johnson, we talk about Alexander Pope, all together, all those giants of the neoclassical movement, they rejected John Donne, and they did even more than that. They negatively framed him. You know, the term framing, I love this term. Framing, to frame somebody, to talk about him or her in a way that would change people's, perceptions negatively or positively. So, Ben Jonson said, we'll count the things. Ben Jonson said, John Donne deserves hanging. John Donne will perish. The most interesting reaction to John Donne was by John Dryden. John Dryden said, Donne affects the metaphysics. He affects the metaphysics, whatever that means. John Donne perplexes the minds of the fair sex. John Donne confuses women. John Donne is too difficult for women to understand. And the interesting thing is that, again, Dryden, like most of those patriarchal figures, appointed himself as the spokesperson for women. And assumed that women will not be, despite the fact that history says, the graphical information, that John Donne was mainly writing for women. And I think two of his patrons were women. So he was sending some of these poems to women. So when you come and say, okay, John Donne, I'm sorry, your poetry is difficult. Oh, Dryden, you don't understand my poetry. No, not me. Women don't understand your poetry. And this in itself, like indicating that John Donne could be an anti-feminist poet. This remark itself is not only anti-feminist, it's misogynistic also. It hates women. It assumes women to be less intellectual. Dryden, yeah, like Dryden's remark is anti-feminist in itself. Dryden saying that John Donne confuses women, is too difficult for women, is anti-feminist and misogynistic. Because he assumes that, again, that women are not smart enough. Now, we'll see other critics reacting. I'll go through the list now, like Samuel Johnson describes John Donne in a very also negative way, and he gives him and his followers the name metaphysical poets. Metaphysical poets and metaphysical poetry. And until this very day, we know them as the metaphysical poets. Now, what does it mean? What is metaphysical? Don't raise your hand because it means nothing. It's crap. Imagine your most, like your, an arch enemy giving you a nickname. Is she going to be generous about that? Is she going to say good stuff about yourself?
No.
And be careful, most of those poets and movements were not named, like they didn't name themselves, they didn't give themselves the name we use now. Even the Romantics, like later critics said, okay, these are the Romantic poets. The theater of the absurd. Samuel Beckett didn't say, okay, I write absurd stuff. Other critics, and usually critics who don't like you would give you the name, like what happened with John Donne. So in my opinion, metaphysical, okay, if metaphysical, some people try to compromise. If metaphysical means, intellectual, I would take it. Argumentative, I would take it. But it was used as a term, as T.S. Eliot himself says, it was used as a term of abuse.
Yes.
As an insult, as a way to drive people away from those poets. Metaphysical poetry. So if you want to define meta means this, and physical means this, and beyond nature, don't do that. The term itself, the word itself, means nothing, because it was given by the enemies, let me say, of the metaphysical poets. So today we use this as a term of convenience. Khalas, everybody knows that these are the Romantics. Although sometimes I insist on calling them John Donne school. John Donne school of, or movement, school of poetry. Okay, we'll see two poems. We mentioned one last time. We'll go through it again and see another poem by John Donne and how this changed in many ways. Do you have any question before we go through this again? I'll be posting this under the videos on YouTube so you can use them. Okay, so if you want me to wrap things up, these are the rules of decorum. Very old rules to examine what is proper and what is appropriate to be in poetry or not to be in poetry. This was meant to guide people. If you want to write great literature, follow, imitate, copy great poets. Poetry had two aims: to teach and delight, to please and to educate. Now again, that subject matter had to be sublime and elite, talking about issues like issues of great significance to the whole society, like the gods, the battles, heroes, the kings and the queens. There should always be things related, like in the themes, related to universal truths, something to transcend sometimes the barriers of time and etc. To achieve decorum, mixture of forms should not happen. You don't mix tragedy and comedy. Don't do that. Comedy is comedy, tragedy is tragedy. This is basically in tragedy, not poetry, but poetry. Drama is poetry also. Okay? Now the diction has to be highly embellished, refined, and sophisticated. Something called poetic diction. The descriptions themselves are supposed to be pleasant, delicate, flowery, idyllic, sweet, romantic, like we saw with Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, we saw in Marlowe's Come Live With Me and Be My Love. The scenery, the beauty, life, the utopia-like setting. Poetry has to be expressed in words or phrases that are not in ordinary conversation, but in what is known as the poetic language, the language of poetry. The same thing again with the rules of decorum that dictate a poem has to use a regular form, a highly structured form. The shape, the lines, even the syllables, everything has to be highly calculated. I give here the sonnet as an example, being the epitome of decorum. Now, John Donne is a modernist. A modernist is somebody who writes against the mainstream, the traditions, who wants to break the rules, to bring something new. And a modernist is not something that happened in the 20th century or 21st century. It's anybody who wrote differently. Why? Because John Donne believed these rules were limiting, were restricting. And many of those, many critics later on believed in the same way, like the Romantics. These rules were limiting. We'll mention this again with the Romantics. I believe that these rules make poetry elitist for the educated, for people who go to university and learn about ancient literature and ancient languages and the rules of poetry writing. Therefore, we'll see how poetry, for example, employs parody and satire and uses intertextuality as a means to subvert and undermine and challenge and defy, like Noah said, the given, well-established forms of not only poetry but also social construct, like I say here. The attack against these rules was also against the social and poetic mainstream constructs of everything, of women, of poets, of everything. And that is serious. That is why people would hate poets like John Donne and those who break the rules. Because this is not only about poetry, it's about the whole world view. We are living, remember the chain of being, you know, this chain of being with God being here, the king and everything. This was thought to be God-given. Any change in this order means destroying the whole world, creating chaos. And that was not allowed to be. Now, John Donne, these are interesting things people said about John Donne. Again, Ben Jonson saying, for not being understood, John Donne will perish. Number one, he will not be understood, and therefore he will die out. He will be forgotten. Sorry, Ben Jonson.
Killed or
John Donne,
Yeah.
he passed away.
Because
And that, for not keeping the accent, the music, the rules, whatever it means exactly, not the accent of the language, like the music, the poetry, the rhythm, he deserved hanging. That's very extreme, huh? And then John Dryden says, John Donne affects the metaphysics. He perplexes the minds of the fair sex, that's women, you know, trying to be cute, with nice speculations of philosophy when he should engage hearts. Look at how this, I call this the how to do manual, what to do in poetry. If you want to write poetry to women, you have to address their hearts, to entertain their softness, the softness of love, something John Donne disagrees with. Samuel Johnson says, Donne's poetry is a combination of dissimilar images or discovery of occult resemblances in things apparently unlike. And the famous thing he said, the most heterogeneous ideas. And he does, John Donne. He doesn't stick to one, like, you know, lane. He just keeps going here and there. Like in a religious poem, you will find like some sexual imagery and vice versa. And again, because of the geographical discoveries and his interest in some kind of sciences, he will include the references to the universe, to geography, to places. He was trying to change. For those people that was like, oh, why are you mixing this and that? Mixing, you know, genres was not allowed. So the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. So you can bring heterogeneous different ideas together. But John Donne is overdoing it. He's bringing very unlikely things together. I don't think this is because he was doing this, but it's mainly because they were not used to such things. Nature and art are ransacked. I love this metaphor, how John Donne, you know, ransacks nature and art together in a way that is unfamiliar to them, for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. Alexander Pope says, listen, even those haters and losers, R.I. Trump, of John Donne, Like they hated him. They didn't like to, many of them admitted that John Donne was witty. That he had unprecedented wit. Genius. They're here. مصيبة. Not Alexander Pope. Not Alexander Pope. This is, by the way, this is a nice guy, Alexander Pope. You should read what he did to Shakespeare. What he said about Shakespeare. Very interesting guy. Sometimes he would change things in Shakespeare plays and said, I think Shakespeare meant it to be this way. That's very, very extreme. He said, Donne had no imagination, but as much wit as I think any writer can possibly have. And his wit is ordinary. He's not unprecedented. He has no imagination. Ooh. Now, modernist poets, unsurprisingly, Samuel Johnson loved him. Because remember, the Romantics hated the Neoclassicists. So everybody who hated the Neoclassicists always went back to whom? To John Donne. To tell the people, like, look, we're not doing this like other people did this. John Donne was the guide. Described him as wonder, exciting, and vigor, intenseness, and peculiarity of thought, using at will the most boundless stores of capacious memory, and exercised on subjects where we have no right to expect. Unexpected. He goes, Shakespeare, the undiscovered territory from whose bourne no traveler returns. John Donne goes there. This is the wit of John Donne. Now Herbert, this is the guy responsible. We always attribute, the revival, the resurrection of John Donne to T.S. Eliot. It's true. But it was this guy, this amazing guy, Herbert Grierson, who wrote a book and collected most of the poems by John Donne and his followers in a book. Later, T.S. Eliot's review of the book made them what they became. He praised John Donne as reflective, the most thoughtful, imaginative, genius, unconventional. Look at the word, unconventional. T.S. Eliot described them in his article, a generation, and I love this statement, a generation most named than read. People name Donne, the metaphysicals, but they don't usually read them. And when they read them, they don't benefit from John Donne. T.S. Eliot believed that poetry has to be difficult. He believed that poets, to write great poetry, they have to imitate John Donne, to write like John Donne. And in the 20th century, ironically, John Donne comes back to life 300 years later. I don't like to say T.S. Eliot discovered him or brought him to life. Like, he came to life himself. He resurrected himself like a phoenix. He found us. And I love one critic said John Donne was writing 300 years ahead of his time. In the 20th century, he became one of the most significant poets. One of the most significant poets. One of the most quoted poets probably after Shakespeare. John Donne. Okay, this is a surprise or not. Virginia Woolf loved John Donne. And look at what she said about John Donne and his representation of women. Because again, you will find so many articles accusing John Donne of being an anti-feminist, even a misogynist. Somebody who hates women. She says, Donne's poems reveal a lady of a very different caste. She was brown, but she was also fair. She was solitary, but also sociable. She was rustic, yet also fond of city life. She was skeptical, yet devout, emotional, but reserved. In short, she was as various and complex as John Donne himself. Not only just inactive, absent, muted object of admiration. She's very colorful. She's complex. She's also various. And again, she believes that John Donne empowers women. And empowering women is one of the reasons why we still seek out John Donne. Why after 300 years, now 400 years, and more, we still hear the sound of his voice speaking across the ages so distinctly. No man is an island, John Donne says. One of the most beautifully said. You will be surprised how many people usually quote John Donne. The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway is said to be a quote from his poem, The Sun Rises. In his beautiful extract where he says, it's not poetry actually, it's prose, no man is an island. At the end he says, I included a quote here, don't ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. You know, in the church, in the past, if somebody died, the bells of the church will be tolling, will be ringing, just to say that somebody is dead. So he says, if you hear the bell, don't send to ask who's dead, who died. You died. Yeah. To whom the bell tolls, also from this great guy. Okay, ladies, question, please.
I have a question. I mean, before John Donne, weren't there any previous attempts to rebel against the rules of decorum? I mean, was he influenced by any other critic or poet, or he just woke up one day and said, "I want to start a new story"?
That's a very interesting question. This is what we mean by going back and trying to reread and dig. There could have been poets like Shakespeare, like Donne, who were totally obliterated because they were forgotten. Nobody recorded them. Nobody wrote their poetry. Nobody. And the question applies to women, by the way. Women, when you studied, like the first, woman, probably the first poem by woman we studied previously was in the 17th century. Women must have written stuff before, but they were not taken seriously. Their moms, their dads, their brothers, their sisters might have made fun of them. So maybe there was somebody, but I'm not aware of anybody John Donne was imitating or following or taking as a role model. Maybe he is this genius who just said, I should be doing something differently. Please.
I don't think actually anybody wakes up and says, I want to make a new school.
It's a process, yeah.
Right, it's his beliefs, he has different ideas, and so he writes according to those different ideas, and then later on people decide that he's a different school.
But many people liked to follow him. He had, I'm sorry, not many people, few people loved his poetry during his lifetime and later on. Women were great admirers. We usually forget this. And again, this says to Dryden, shut up. Because he assumes that women cannot understand.
So when would we describe him, or like when we first start talking about Virginia Woolf as a person who hates women, if women really admired him? I think that he actually was...
Okay, the only person who said John Donne hates women is Dryden. Somebody who hates John Donne. So don't take Dryden for granted talking about Donne.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. I think that women really liked the poetry of John Donne because he was, like according to society, as inferior as they were.
The subclass, that's he belonged to the subclass. He was marginalized on the fringe of society. They were also there. But they found something in his poetry, something appealing to women, something empowering women, giving women voice. In John Donne's, if we go back here, again, taking this as a love poem, not as a religious poem, because people like to take it as a religious poem and say, here, Jesus is, going into the river, and the sun being a pun, playing on the Son of God and the sun here. The woman in the text is present and powerful and active. Not here, in other texts as well. Sometimes she's silent, she doesn't speak. But what she does is what the whole poem revolves around, the whole universe sometimes. Okay? So in like we said this before here, the woman is not as naive, or I don't want to say naive, is not as passive or inactive as we saw in Marlowe. She's not taken for granted. Here, in my understanding, the very idea itself, the very idea of John Donne writing this different, taking the whole poem into a different scene instead of the pastoral nature and green, grass and everything, taking it to this scene is new. And this idea in itself suggests that John Donne knows that the woman is going to understand this. He's going to understand the different, the change in setting from, again, the idealism of the Elizabethan age to the realism of John Donne. Look at how he's, again, I pointed this out before. When he's talking about the scene where men are running after the woman, the fish, you know, going to be for the bait, being the woman. And look at this negativity here, or darkness, I would say. The change of tone. He's realistic. He's not telling the woman, I have the perfect world. I'm drawing the perfect world. This world has, you know, beautiful things, but also dark things. When we talk about people freezing and legs injured. Look at this word. I don't think you'll find treacherously in anybody's poem. Treacherously. You know? He says it's an unpoetic word. It sounds unpoetic. But for John Donne, any word can be there. And look at the strangling. You know, to strangle something, to hang somebody, to suffocate somebody's snare, or when do we knit? And then he says, look at, again, the slimy nail. Like, this is not an idyllic scene. This is not a romantic scene he's creating. Because he's suggesting that this is life. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. This is the reality of life. The bedded fish in banks outraced the tired men who couldn't get the woman, or curious traitors sleeve even when they tried to deceive each other to get this bait. You will read so many things about the last, so many interpretations about the last. This woman cannot be deceived, or this woman does not deceive. Why is he saying the fish, if he is enchanted by the woman, if he is in love with her, if he wants her, why is he saying that he is a fool? Because in another poem, by the way, he says, does he say, I'm triple fool, I know, or I'm a double fool, I know? He begins the poem saying, I'm a stupid person, I'm a fool. I'm a triple fool. I think he says, I am a triple fool, I know, for writing poetry and for saying so. Something, we'll see this extract in a bit. So the fish that is not caught by the bait, by the woman, that manages to escape the woman, the magic of the woman, the beauty here, everything, is wiser than the speaker in the poem. So is he regretting, you know, falling in love? Is he saying? Honestly, I'm not sure what he's saying. And this brings me to a very important point about John Donne. There are always layers in his poems. There are always layers of meanings. You could take the poem here or there and this. Listen, this doesn't make him difficult. This makes him interesting. We take him home. He's not, like if you study other poets, usually you just, okay, think of the poem in the class, you're like, okay. But John Donne lives forever in our memories because you keep asking the question, because he makes you curious. He makes you ask many questions. What if? What does he mean here exactly? Why is he doing this here? Why doesn't this? I read somebody saying this is ironic. Probably he means the opposite of this.
Okay, we go back to being the complexity of John Donne again. I think, like, when I first read it, I was thinking about the bait itself. So when you're talking about a fish getting a bait or eating this bait, it means that this fish will get caught and maybe it will die.
So love is death, he's saying.
Exactly.
He's saying love is death.
He's giving everything he has just for this lover, and then if this lover goes or if this lover vanishes from his life, he will be dead. He has nothing else to do. I don't know, this is how...
This could be one possible reading, like this relationship is his death. But why is he saying this?
Because he's John Donne.
Possibly. So I want you, for the sake of time, I want you to do more research into this. Again, this could be taken in a religious understanding. I don't like to go there. We focus on this being a parody, a love poem. So I listed some features here. I did some kind of stretching of John Donne before we go to the last text. There is always, I don't want to say always, there is parody and intertextuality. And when you parody somebody, you bring them down. You quarrel with them. You dispute with them. You fight with them. You try to offer the readers another possibility of another worldview, a different worldview, telling the people, hey, this is not the only thing. Marlowe's world, there is something else. I think realism as opposed to Elizabethan idealism. Dialogism, I like this. We'll talk about this later on in more detail. He creates dialogues between him and the neoclassicists, between the traditions and the new ways of doing things, between him and the woman, between the woman and him, etc. We will find a conceit, elongated metaphor. The woman as a bait is a very strange, metaphor. This is the bait, the food you use to catch fish, and this is the woman. There is no resemblance whatsoever. When you go through the whole thing, it's like, maybe. This is called a conceit, where the relationship between the vehicle and the tenor, between the two things, could be far-fetched, unlikely to happen in real life. And the second part of the conceit is that it's long. Goes through the whole poem sometimes. There is wit, there's argument. He mixes the devotional and the secular. If you want to read this poem as a love poem, but also as a religious poem, he mixes religion with sensuality. Some people might describe the language, the words of, slimy and strangled and treacherously and cut their legs as vulgar. If vulgar means colloquial language, okay. Again, we'll find more personal experiences like the Romantics, more in a different way than the collective idea of writing about the queen and the battles and the heroes and the society. And definitely, John Donne is, like Virginia Woolf suggested, he's empowering women. He's showing us a woman that is not simple-minded, that is not naive, that is not inactive, but a woman who's powerful, a woman who is active, a woman who is intellectual, a woman who is the core of the whole poem, the whole text. Now, in the remaining minutes, I want just to show you what he did to the sonnet. So if you count the lines here, look at this. How many lines do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 14 lines. This is a sonnet. Remember the sonnet?
Yeah.
We had Petrarch and Shakespeare. The English sonnet, the Italian sonnet. Theme, love, theme, love, but also expanded to include many things, right? Structure, octave, and sestet. Structure, 3 quatrains, 1 couplet, 1 rhyming couplet. Rhyme scheme, A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. Other varieties are possible. With Shakespeare, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and the rhyming couplet gets to G, G. The rhyme scheme here begins with V, which takes A, so B. It's not about the letters, it's about the sound. Throw, B, and me, A. And then going back to B, A, flow and go, B, B. Now delivery is also an A. And look at this. If you get to like, okay, A, B, A, B, B, A, B, B, A, then this is most probably some kind of imperfect rhyme. Some people who do some stretching will say maybe for poetic, like a poetic license, poetic reasons, you could just give it a little bit of a push, like delivery, like me, something. Okay, like? Or an imperfect rhyme. Thank you. I think I take it as an imperfect rhyme. And then here, men, we have C, D, D, and C. And then eternally is E. E, but again with an imperfect rhyme. Yeah, I heard people like read this, internalize, so it rhymes with die. you know. But I also think this is an imperfect rhyme, eternally and die. Like, look at one sonnet. Shakespeare, you could read 15 sonnets, 20 sonnets, and you don't find one imperfect rhyme. But with John Donne, you'll find a lot of them. Okay. Now we had something similar to this that wasn't that common. If we talk about Shakespeare and Petrarch being the most famous sonneteers, John Donne is not following Petrarch and he is not following Shakespeare.
It's 14 line, not 12. It's Shakespearean. Shakespeare 14.
Okay.
But Petrarch 12.
12 years.
So he's mixing.
12 what?
12 lines.
The sonnet? Have you been asleep in the past month? 14 lines. Sonnet, 14 lines. There's no way a sonnet can be 13 or... Okay. So many people would see this as closer to Petrarch than Shakespeare. That's correct. But I like to take it as a mixture of both. He goes for Petrarch and he always kind of insists on the couplet. Remember, like I said, Shakespeare made the sonnet famous in England, made the couplet something, wow, nobody can do. I think John Donne is saying, I can do the couplet thing. Kind of posing more challenge. But what's more, when you read the text, death be not proud. Oh my God. What is he? Whose death? What is he talking about? Who is he talking to? His wife being likened to death? His mother-in-law? Definitely not. This is, if you look at this is a religious poem, a devotional sonnet. A poem a religious person writes. Look at this. He's taking the most sacred form of poetry, the sonnet, and almost changing everything about it. A theme, a rhyme scheme, and the structure. The structure could be an octave, like what we did with in Who So Let's to Hunt, an octave, a quatrain, and a couplet, or three quatrains, and then a couplet. Isn't this interesting? Imagine again the people who loved the sonnet and considered it nothing but pure love poem. How are they going to react to John Donne? Someone say, hey, I have a sonnet for you. Wow, really? Nice, give it to me. And then all the death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. And remember, with Shakespeare, every line is basically one full sentence. Shall I compare thee to summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. But with John Donne, he just keeps snaking. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. You're not powerful. You're not dreadful, death. And this is a very memorable thing to say. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. We'll go through this in detail next episode. I want you to just, for the sake of comparison, to see other sonnets by John Donne. This is also a sonnet. Look at the beginning. When you read the sonnet, stay away from people because you don't want to get them to misunderstand you. Spit in my face, ye Jews. There's anti-Semitism here, but look at the opening here.
He should be beheaded for what he done.
Beheaded?
For the sonnet of love.
We shifted from shall I compare thee to a summer's day to this, spit in my face, ye Jews. And then probably the most famous sonnet, batter my heart. Look at the openings. Death be not proud, spit in my face, batter my heart. And finally, look at these summaries here. I'll go through them and then stop. So I just want to repeat things I said in other words. We'll continue next class with John Donne. So the metaphysicals, inverted commas, group of poets led by John Donne, and then we have Herbert later on, Andrew Marvell, and Henry Vaughan. Donne wrote poetry as other poets were. He wrote different poetry, were adopting the classical rules of the decorum. John Donne was a modernist. A modernist means somebody who writes against the current, against the mainstream rules of versification. The neoclassical critics did not like John Donne. They rejected him. They negatively framed him. They kicked him out of, and I can't remember, I think it was Samuel Johnson who said John Donne is not a poet. I think this is the most extreme thing you could do. I think it's more extreme than saying he deserves hanging. He's not a poet. And then, thanks to Grierson and T.S. Eliot, many people started to admire and appreciate John Donne. Today, John Donne is one of the most significant poets of all times. Next class, we'll see 2 poems for John Donne, and then we'll move to another poet. If you have questions, please hang around. يعطيكم العافية.